I think I got this. So what we do on this channel is make games as well as play games. You're going to see a game down below. Yes, it's true. I'm a cartoon ape in a jungle, but we also make games. The one you see down below is called Small Towers. And yeah, we made that game. It's for chat, by the way, and if you're bored with what I'm doing, you can play that game. It's a 2-player game, but there's an AI bot or 2 that will play. They're demoing the game right now. But we also take time out to play games, and we take time to use like this just chatting category to talk about game design. This series that we call Design Chat allows us to talk about game design. And we've talked about a few things already. This would be the 6th one. And so we spend about an hour each time and build up some knowledge about what game design is and frankly what it is not, and how anyone can do this. Okay. In fact, last time we spent an hour and we made a game. Now, is it a AAA game that like has all the art? No. In fact, the first things we said was you don't need to know art or code or story. And if you have art, code, or story, it doesn't mean you have a game. These are what's called mutually exclusive things. And then we talked about, well, what do you need to have to make a game? And so last time we said, let's use those things you need to have and let's make a game. In fact, let's use a process. Hello. Nice to see you. Thanks for stopping by. Let's do the design process to make a game. Right? We did that last time. So this is the 6th time. I'm going to briefly describe what we've already talked about because, we need to move on. What I'd like to do today is talk about, okay, you have a process and you know what you can do to make a game, what you need and what you should focus on. Great. Now, what else can I do to make my games better? Because the whole thing about our process is improvement. And so you're going to be looking for new ways to improve your game. And I'd like to talk about that. Briefly, previously we said, I'm going to show this big slide. Previously we said, you don't need art or code or story, but we did rely on finding these things that you definitely need, the minimum requirements to make a game. There's just a few. And you'll find that all of this centers on the player. In fact, we said, if there is no player, there is no game. You need a player. So we stick with that. Keep that in mind, right? But we said, you don't need art to make a game. Guess a number between 1 and 10. That's a game, and it doesn't take any art. In fact, there's no story or code. Done. So, but you need some modest amount of player control. If they guess a number between 1 and 10, they've got some control. If they guess the right number, they win. If not, they lose. These are the rules of the game, and if they accept those rules, you got a game. In fact, we could do it again. It's replayable. Now, that's a very simple game. So is tic-tac-toe. So is flipping a coin. So is tag. And all the way up to Marvel Rivals, Minecraft. Well, we'll talk about Minecraft. The point is, there are similarities between all games. It's the expectation of the player that these things exist in the game, and then they can play. In fact, we went on to say, in the beginning, to get them to start playing, you need to attract them with some promise. The game has a promise to the player. The designer builds that into the design of the game. So they'll start playing. This is like the title. This is like the screenshots. This is like what you see on the game board. This is the main idea of the game. And until the player sits down and plays, it doesn't exist. The game does not exist yet. But as soon as they say, oh, okay, I'll play that game, now the game can exist. Once they are engaged, you just don't want to break them out of it. And they will reach a win or lose result. But in the meantime, they're in something called a loop, because they're connected to what is happening in the game. They're processing what's happening. They're making their decisions and actions, and then the rules of the game respond. If any of those four pieces break down, this loop breaks, and they're not in the game anymore, and the game is gone. It doesn't exist. So there's a danger there, implied, that you don't want to confuse the player. You don't want to cut out their visuals, for example. You don't want to change the rules of the game unexpectedly. You don't want to do these things that would break them out of the loop. Meanwhile, these players are trying to learn how to play better, because games start out with the player ignorant of all the rules, and then they learn some stuff and get better at the game. And then they get better at the game, and then they get better at the game. They may want to replay the game and try it again and be better. In fact, we arrived at the idea that players are learning machines. That games are actually about teaching. That your work as game designer includes the ability to teach the player how to play the game. The first questions a player will ask about a game include, it's basically, how do you play is what they're asking. But specifically, they're saying, who am I in this game? Where am I in this game? Like, what is the player character and the game world? What am I trying to do? In other words, what's the objective of the game? They're asking, what do I have working for me? They're asking, what is working against me? These 5 questions, all players ask of all games. As a designer, you want to recognize that this is part of the presentation, the communication to the player. It must be answered in some way. If you hold back on some answers to this, you run the risk of the player breaking out of the loop, getting frustrated that they don't know what they're trying to do, or even where they are might frustrate them if it's so abstract they can't orient, for example. They don't know what's working against them and they just lose. They don't know how to play. These questions are the beginning of where the player begins to learn, and as the game might progress, what is working for me and what is working against me may change. In fact, who am I, where am I, and what am I trying to do may even evolve, but slowly. And the player will learn this, meaning you can't just change it, but you introduce new concepts and teach them. The last truism that we came to so far is, it is always safe to go back to the player's experience. That is what we're designing. It's not art, it's not code, it's not story. What we're designing when we design a game is the experience of the player as they play. While they are playing, they have an experience. So, wait, how do we do that? There's a couple of big questions there, like what is experience? That's a big one. But also, what do we have control over that would affect a player's experience? That's a great question. In short, the answer is the game rules. What the designer has in front of them, what they have to work with, is the game rules. Those rules are implemented through code. They might be represented with art or story. But really, the core of it is the rules, and everything grows out of that rule set. Literally, pick a number between 1 and 10. these rules of the game are really the only piece of the game that's there. It's the only necessary piece of the game. So when we say it's always safe to go back to the player experience, what we're pointing out is A, the player is the center of all these things. B, you can tweak and improve the experience of the player if you know that's what you're focused on. If you are instead thinking about other things, you might lose sight of opportunity. You might even lose sight of a problem with the player's experience. To say it's always safe to go back to this player's experience is, if you're stuck, this is a place to go. This is how you get unstuck. Okay, so we talked about these things. And we also talked about like myths of game design and blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to gloss over that because the next thing we did is like, okay, well, all this is cool. I need these things. I don't need art. Okay, I should get the player interested in the game. Okay, they're going to ask these questions. They're learning machines. Okay, but how do we like do this? What is design? Like what do we actually do? We said, well, there is a process. This process is cyclical, meaning we're going to go to the end of this step and go right back to the top. And through each cycle, what we're doing is improving the design that we have. Now, this could be the whole game, or it could be one piece of the game. Each piece might be its own puzzle, its own problem, its own design task, and can be handled with this same process. In short, this is kind of the cheat sheet for what to do in any design, not just game design, by the way, but all forms of design do this. First of all, your focus is on the user or the audience or the player in our case. It is the fact that design is made for people. And so we focus on the people and what they need. To start with, we think about what they need in full. We try to figure out all the needs they have, but let's focus on one and try to come up with all the different ideas we could have to meet that one need. All those ideas are great. You might think of that as brainstorming, but hold on. We realized that there's a second part of that brainstorming process that makes it the formal brainstorming process of all design. The second step in brainstorming is to prioritize all those ideas into the best idea. We should actually take some time and talk about that brainstorming process formally. And I want to make sure that we didn't already do it, so I'll do it later. But with this, let's come up with all the ideas and then take the best one we can think of right now. Let's test that. Make no mistake, if you skip testing your ideas, you're not doing design. You're doing art, and there's nothing wrong with art. Go to town. But design cares very deeply about how well it works. And testing is really the only way you can be sure. It is, in fact, science. So it's not just art. We recognize that there's a multiplying effect of science as well when we're rigorous about it and we test. So we do take our best idea. Great, good ideas. And this sounds like the best idea. Let's go. But we better test, because what if we're totally, totally wrong? We also found out that it's actually good to see the problems, because we'll evaluate the test and be like, oh yeah, that didn't work. That was terrible. And then we realize what was wrong with it. And we say, well, okay, then let's tackle it this way. Then let's think about it another way. We evaluate the results of the test and see new insight. Suddenly, the player needs have some new insight to go with it, and we can see perhaps new ideas to meet the need, or perhaps a better way to prioritize those ideas, and so we have a new plan we can test, and so on. This process is, sounds abstract in general. It's because you can apply it to anything. This is long story short, critical thinking. This is critical thinking, but it's formalized. And the reason why we illustrate these steps, first of all, is to tell you what design is. Hey, Billy, what's going on? Thank you for showing up. Always, 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 if you want me to say hi, use Command Ty. All right. We illustrate these steps to make it clear what design is, also to explain, like, hey, if you're stuck or if there is a problem, you may have skipped a step, or you may not realize you need to move to the next step. The fact that it's cyclical, the fact that it comes back up here with new insight, means that we're going to improve. In fact, this guarantees improvement. Guaranteeing improvement, like ratcheting up the quality of your design with every cycle, is the strongest thing that design has going for it. In fact, it's so strong you can't fail. Literally, you cannot fail if you follow this process and continue with this process. Right? In fact, if you are failing, that's part of the process, and now you can make it better. And you keep repeating until you're no longer failing. Literally, guaranteeing improvement means there's some safety here. And that's what we arrived at. We said, you know what? As long as you begin this process, as long as you continue this process, it is safe because it will always improve. So feel free. Go to town. And that's where last time we said, you know what? Let's just make a game. Because we have all these ideas. And now we have this safety net and this procedure to follow. Let's just make a game. And so we did. It was a pretty simple game. It was a very simple game. We made it in no time, so it better be. But the idea was a game design does not require art, code, or story. It only requires these minimal requirements. And so we made up some rules. We made sure they led to a win or lose result, and we gave the players some control. And yeah, it's a game. It was a pretty simple idea. Hey player, you're a square. And there's another square called win. Get there. And, they could move up, down, left, right. And, there they go. Now, this is a modest amount of control. And some clear, promise to the player that you could win. But to lose, we said, you know what? There is actually a time limit. I'll just make a stopwatch icon here. There is a time limit here. And whether this shrinks or there's a progress bar that indicates time or something, or there's actually a time display or something, this is a limited time win square that you can get into. You have to get to the win square in time, or else you'll lose. But if you get there, you'll win. This was satisfying the win condition, lose condition. This was satisfying player control. With these modest rules, we could build on that and even make more levels, more challenging things. Increase the potential to lose, effectively decrease the potential to win, by inserting things that are working against them. We hadn't really thought about things that were working for them other than the basic movement. But, working against them was pretty easy. You just put a wall there. Another thing we did was, let's, insert a black hole. It was getting silly, but we're just proving the point that you could do this. Now, is this a game you can play yet? Well, the design is there and could be implemented because of what I want to talk about today. Those rules. The rule set we made included what the player can do, how they win, and how they lose. Literally, the rules of the game only needed to refer to these things and make sure these other two requirements are there. The rules then just had to be accepted by the player. Suddenly there's a game. So, were we able to play it? No. But it is a design. Technically, it's also a game. In fact, we talked about the, level 2, level 3, and there's a progression in it, and that's kind of cool. But let's call it, there are rules of the game, right? Player, you need to get to the win square, right? If you get to the win square, you win. But if you don't get there in time, you lose. Right? I'm combining this into one rule, which is not proper. I'll explain why in a minute. But get to the win square in time or you lose is almost all of the rule set, right? Because, well, how do I get there, right? Well, you can move up, down, left, right. Player, you can move up, down, left, right? And this gives the player some modest amount of control. It doesn't need to be total control. In fact, it can't be. But it gives them enough control to navigate, like literally, towards the win or lose state. So this describes the game as much as we needed to prove that it was a game, because we could compare it to the minimum requirements and say, yeah, that does it. As long as the player agrees to these rules right here, then it's good. So I just said the designer's main control over the player experience is finessing these rules. Creating the rules is what we did last time to make the game. And then we said, but we can just keep improving this game. We can just keep doing this and improving the game. So what do we have to work with? Well, these rules. What we did last time was paper prototype or play test this game by imagining what it would be like to not be able to win until you get there, to imagine the win square disappears after some time, to imagine if they did get to the win square, they win, etc. We imagined that, and we're role-playing as the player, while also role-playing effectively as the computer or the rules of the game being implemented, right? Because if these rules are implemented, we actually have a computer game. If there's a game engine with a square and you can move up, down, left, right, there's a game engine with a win square that detects that this square is inside that one, then we can say win. If the game engine can run a timer down, and when the timer's up, as long as the square's not in here, say you lose. If that's true, then we kind of have the game. We have the game implemented through, say, a game engine. Notice that there's really nothing in this except the rules. It's the rules of the game that would make the game. It's the rules of the game that that the designer has control over to improve the experience of the player. And it's the rules of the game that we're going to focus on now, because we play tested this by imagining how to faithfully follow these rules and whether that would actually make the minimum requirements for a game. To improve the game design, we would want to continue to test, and maybe testing as quickly as we can possibly do so would include more role-playing, more paper prototyping, sure. We might eventually move on to the computer and try to implement these rules to actually play it, have the computer manage the rest of the rules in real time, and adjust things like the speed of the player, the amount of time, that kind of stuff, the size of the square, the distance between them, things like that. Because right now this is such a simple game, there's only a few factors that would manage the player's experience. We might also, while we're there, discover new opportunities of things we can do. We thought of a wall, but what if there was like a maze to get to the wind square? We thought of like a black hole, but what if there was like a conveyor belt that like pushed you somewhere, right? What if the wind square, I think we thought of this, the wind square actually like travels around or something. When we have a set of rules, we can play test. According to this process, we should be able to improve and always improve and always improve as long as we can test. Right? The moment that it would be difficult to test our current ideas would be the moment we need to change how we're testing, which might say, yeah, maybe we should implement it in the game engine. For example, to test the speed of the player, right? It might be too difficult to gauge that based on paper prototyping and role-playing like this. But you'd be surprised how much faster it is to do this than it is to implement it in the game engine. Our other series design workshop has done lots of cool things like moving game objects, timers, even pixel art animation, things like that. But, we've built it up step by step over time, just like this series, Design Chat. And what we can do with these two are going to slowly be talking about the same things. But Design Chat gives us the opportunity to work on things like how far can we go with just role-playing, with just paper prototyping? How far can we improve this before we need to be in the game engine, right? I would assert this is faster, and therefore we should be here in paper prototyping land for as long as possible. In other words, revising these rules, maybe adding to them, maybe finding the new things that work against the player or new things that work for the player to make the new levels of the game and all that stuff. Thinking about this in paper and with role-playing is much faster. This iterative process is great, but it's terrible when it's slow. We want to test, and as long as we can test, we should just do this as fast as possible. Let's get all the bad ideas out of the way, find the best ones, and keep improving as quickly as possible. It's kind of the idea. If you skip the testing because you're thinking that's faster, you're not doing design. But if you are testing, let's go as fast as we can. Let's try to streamline all of this. Let's focus very clearly on one idea at a time based on the needs that we can see. One need, let's find all the ideas, but then find one idea to test. Let's get the results. Let's very carefully evaluate it so we can move forward. But let's do it efficiently. Well, in that way, this is really fast. So I think there's two things we can do. First of all, the game rules is something we can focus on today, because this is a loose description of the game. We were really just sketching this out last time. This time I'm going to lay this out properly. What I mean by that is we're very close to actually being able to code this if we needed to. Not that we're going to do it right now. But let's just put the rules in a particular format, right? Game rules are the thing we can manipulate in our design process. The only thing that really the game designers have going for them and what they have to work with. And everything else is going to grow out of that. But to be specific, to be intentional, to avoid miscommunication, especially toward the player, there's a format to these rules. It is literally this. If something, 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 then something, something, something. Done. And that's going to sound far too simple. There's no way that that's the format of rules, especially for code. And I'm like, oh, yes, it is. So, player, get to the win square in time or lose. Actually has a bunch of rules packed in there. Let's pull it apart. If the player is inside the win square before time is up, they win. That's one rule, but it doesn't include lose. That's okay. That's going to be a separate rule. If the player is inside the win square, they win. And that's one rule. In fact, it meets a requirement that we can get to a win state. That's good. Then they win. Right? Now, this is going to sound like, well, wait a minute, you're just writing words. Well, yeah, but it's a rule. As long as the player agrees to this rule, it's actually part of their game world. It's part of their player experience. They count on this to be true, that this rule will be followed very strictly. It's what they agree to, and yeah, it's actually what causes win. So we need it. You bet. Okay, let's move on. If the win square disappears, in this case we're saying like the win square actually shrinks or it just goes away after the time limit, right? If the win square disappears, right, and we should be intentional about whether it is shrinking or fading away, I guess that would be terrible. But if it just blinked away, that would be terrible as well, because we wouldn't have... The thing about shrinking is it's slowly doing it, and the player has a way to predict how much time they have left. That was one of the advantages. Okay, but if the win square disappears, player loses. Well, then player loses, right? Oops. The word win needs to be in there. Then player loses, right? So these are rules. And I pulled this out into two rules. It's in this format, which helps us formalize the rules such that they are precise. I can now assert that as long as the player made it inside the win square, they're styling. They're chilling. They won. And that will always be true. If, however, this square disappears, you can... I guess you can imply that the game is over if... Let's not imply. Let's do it. If win or lose, right? If win or lose happens, then game over. Okay, now we're very intentional, very specific, right? Because you cannot continue to play after you win. If I get to the win square and the win square then disappears and I win but then I lose, that's not cool. And if the win square disappears, I cannot win. I mean, that's true. So, because I need to be inside it, but it's gone, so I can't, right? So these three, I just pulled it apart into three different rules. Why? Well, it's so precise now, it cannot be misinterpreted. This is as much about communication as anything, especially to the player. This is really what the designer has control over. It's the rules. And this very simple game already has three rules we need to make sure we have. But rather than this one, which was kind of all the rules in one, smushed together, I mean, we can explain it to people like this colloquially, but it's not precise. These are precise. You can't misinterpret it, right? Now we could go a little further and say, wait, does the square need to be all the way inside the win square in order to win? Well, let's just say yes. Or do they just need to be touching it to win? I say no, they need to be inside. That's what that word there means, yeah? Okay, player can move up, down, left, right. Okay. This is literally if W key, player moves up, right? And then player moves up, right? And let's just call it, there's the other three directions, right? So if S, then down, right? A is left and D is right. Now, you'd be looking at it and be like, well, I know what WASD is, dude. And that's not the point. This is precise. And the reason why this matters is because literally in code, you have to define all four of them. You can't just wing it and say, yeah, do WASD. The computer doesn't know what you're talking about. But this is so precise, not only does the player know, not only do the other people on your team potentially know, but the computer can be given exactly these instructions. Now we can go further. How fast do you move? You might say player move speed is, if player moves, how about this, right? If player moves, then their speed is, we talked about speed in the design workshop series. It's distance and time together, like miles per hour. Well, this would be like units per second. And we might say like per 1 second they move 1 unit. Fine. But now it's a rule, now it's defined, and now we know how fast they move. In fact, that may inform how quickly that square disappears. Hey, where is that in time where the square is going to disappear? That rule isn't here yet. See, you're so perceptive. That's right. Check it out. If we, now notice I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rules so far, right? But let's say if game starts, I guess we could say if the game level starts, then the win square begins to shrink. Will I'm pausing because the details are blank. How fast does this disappear is what I'm trying to get to. The fact that there is a timer is what I'm trying to say, but those are two different things. Those are two different rules. If the game level starts, then the win square will shrink over a time, right? Which is not defined, but I'm saying like every level is going to be different. And that is another rule, right? If win square is shrinking, I guess we could say before game over, right? Because we've said if win or lose, then game over, which should stop the win square from shrinking, right? I think so. That's reasonable. If game level running, something like that. Now, if you're starting to get the idea that this is a lot of rules, this is getting complicated, what do we do with this? And I'm like, well, if I tell you it's going to involve the design process and we're going to improve these rules? Ah, right. If the game level is running, when I want to say three things. Goodness. Not only do I want to say, then the win square will shrink over a time, right, before it disappears, but I haven't even said that it will disappear, right, until it disappears. Until it disappears. Okay, this is a lot, right? I can't spell. Okay. And now I can get to how fast it goes. So we just grew our list of rules from 2, right, to 11. If game level starts, then a new, I'm going to call it a shrink speed. Is used. Now, it could be that the speed is the same as last time. It could be the size of the win square is the same. Wow, that could be a whole new rule. But here's what I'm talking about. So I just made a mess of this board. But the main thing I wanted to point out is this format. This format stayed the same no matter what rule we were talking about. And the beauty of that format is that it's incredibly precise. It includes a condition. This is a condition. And that is literally what it's called in programming as well. If that condition is true, then the result. Each of these rules has this format which very precisely defines how gameplay will play, how the rules will be conducted such that the player can play this game. This is the only way in which the designer can affect the experience of the player. It's through the game rules. So while we started with this and it was like kind of loosey-goosey and it explained the game, I mean, you understood it, it wasn't precise. And the difference is, A, we would not be able to tell a computer what's going on. We would need to define, for example, all 4 keys, W, A, S, and D, to do all 4 directions. We would need to define how fast that player moves. But also, the player needs to agree to the rules. And while they can very efficiently assimilate rules all compact and squished like this, in fact, they could even assume we're using WASD. They're learning machines. They're very good at this. It is this definition and explosion of rule sets that needs to be defined by the designer such that we can now actually improve it. Now, I said we're going to do this. We're going to come back and improve this game. And we already did some of this last time. We said, let's make level 2, level 3, and just we kind of went to town on it, Well, this time I want to say, look, there's a couple of things. First of all, if we have a handle on the rules of that very simple game, it is just a square. You move into the win square, in the time, done. But if we really look at what these rules mean, we put it in this format that helps us do that. And now that we're looking at it, there were all kinds of decisions that we had to make. Did you realize that we needed to stop the game when they won? Did you realize that before we did it? Did you know that we needed to define the speed of the player in order to make this game work? The player might say, this game is fine, and then they start to move and it goes flying off the screen really fast. They can't control it. They say, hey, no way. Or it's moving so slow, it feels frustrating. They would say, no way. It's both the computer and the player and all of the other people on the team that need to know precisely what these rules are. And again, this is the only thing that the game designer has to work with, the rules of the game. Now, we also said like, oh, we need to really think about how this square shrinks. I mean, first of all, shrinking was just a decision we made, but like, and I think that came about through some thinking and stuff, but how it shrinks and what it does from level to level, these are things we came up with after defining these rules better. Now, we define these rules this clearly. Okay, cool. Let's play it again. We are moving 1 unit per second. If this square is actually 1 unit, then we could say like, okay, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. Okay. Oh, that feels pretty slow, actually. It might be fine if we're just moving a straight line. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4. Okay. But we'd also have to say, like, at the beginning of this level, the shrink speed needs to be like, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,005. It needs to be more than 5 seconds because it's going to take me 5 seconds just to get there. Oh, no. Now, we're just paper prototyping this. We're role-playing this. We're imagining that this thing is moving. I'm using my cursor. This is faster, though, because we just found out, oh, yeah, this is probably a little slow, or this needs to shrink very slowly. In fact, there's a shrink speed that we need to define as well, right? We're saying that each level can have its own shrink speed, potentially. Cool. But we don't even know what the base speed is, right? Imagine now we say, okay, here's level 2. We need to change this rule a little bit. Like, we need to actually define what that speed is. We need to say, oh, but there's a wall now. Wait, do we have rules about walls? No, we don't. We say you can move inside the wind square, but we don't say what's going on with walls. Oh my goodness, there's a new rule. You cannot go through a wall. If it's defined as a wall, you cannot go through it. Oh, that's a whole new rule. Like, yeah. In fact, we could go into the rules about physics, but no, we don't need to. We could talk about how there was that black hole idea that we did. Well, there's a whole new set of rules too. Like, if it's within a certain range, then it begins to pull in, which is also affecting the movement of the player along with the player's control at the same time. So the amount of pull, and maybe it's in relation to how close it is to the black hole. You see how that could just explode to like 6 other new rules that need to be defined just for this new level dynamic thing. So let's back it up. We said, yeah, there's this game we made last time, and here are the rules. It is a game. We verified that. Meets all the minimum requirements. We're good. We can explain to the player what they are and what they're doing, and yeah, it can happen. It's a rule. In fact, we did this process in order to get there. Cool. And we were feeling free about it. It's all good. So now we're here. We're trying to, actually, let's improve it. And one of the things that I'm saying is, it's going to help to recognize that the designer's tools to work with primarily begin with the rules that they're playing with. These rules give rise to all the things we've been talking about, including the black hole and the wall and, the shrinking of the wind square, the time limit, the movement. It's, in fact, the entire gameplay defined by rules. And so, yeah, this is the whole thing. To improve it now, we're going to go back to the rules and see what can be improved. we may say, well, the player has a new need. This was too slow, and they need to feel like they are going to get there in time. In fact, we were kind of thinking maybe this shrinks faster, and there was actually no way to win. That's a big need. We need to address that. So we come back to the rules, we adjust this. We come back to the rules, we adjust this. Maybe pressing W and S at the same time doesn't just move in 4 directions. Get this. What if we can move in 8 directions? Bro, we didn't even talk about that. Well, isn't that implied when you move up and left at the same time? Well, maybe, but we did not say that. In fact, there's some funny things to say like, well, we're going to move 1 unit to the right, and we can also move 1 unit up. You can actually move faster if you move diagonal. Think about that. Right? Because this distance diagonally is longer than this distance. Yeah, longer than that distance. This is a common issue with 2D navigation in games. And sometimes you nerf it by just making this shorter and making the speed slower when you go diagonal. And sometimes you don't allow them to move diagonal. I mean, but that's a rule, and we have to decide what that is. In fact, if the designer doesn't figure this out now, you can bet good programmers will come and say, okay, so what about diagonal movement? I mean, they're going to ask the questions, right? If not them, then the player's asking these questions, right? Sooner or later, the designer has to define all of the rules of the game. They're the only ones to do it. It's their only handle on affecting the player experience, and they're in charge. So this format is key because this is a way to understand where some of the rules haven't been defined well enough yet. This is also the key to explain to a programmer, this is what I want. They say, oh, cool, done. Like, literally done. If you told them this and left it at that, they would stop and make you define all the rules. Why? Because the computer needs to know. And a good programmer doesn't want to make design decisions for you. They want you to do it. Not because they're lazy, although they are. But the point is, they're recognizing their role is programming and your role is the rules. They will do what you are saying the rules should do so that we can properly test. I mean, they call it computer science for a reason. That's what they do. Excuse me. So, if I'm telling you, you can make a game, and here's the process, go. And last time we just said, cool, here's a game. And we kind of made something. I keep telling you that this will improve if you just keep going. Don't stop. What we're talking about today is how to continue going, even when it's so simple. This was such a simple game. Just go here, win, right? Otherwise, this shrinks and you lose. What we realize is that's actually just a very loose description of a more complex set of rules. Look at all those rules. In fact, there were more that we didn't write down, right? If what we've got now is a set of rules to work with, we can look closely at the needs of the player and say like, oh, right, that was too slow. Oh, right, the win square shrank too fast. This is too easy now, and we need to ramp up difficulty. We need to answer a question about what is working against them that is more than what was working against them before. There's just a little distance before, and now there's a wall, or now there's a black hole. Hey, we haven't done anything with this, could we? There's an opportunity there. We could give them something that's working for them. Maybe switches that move objects like the wall, or a key to unlock the door to get through the wall, or a portal to go teleport something. Whatever. Who knows? It's interesting to note that this process could find needs, and the ideas to address those needs could be brand new things, opportunities, or they could be solutions to issues and problems the player has, either one. Both of those are an improvement. So in this case, this might be too slow. What can we do? Well, we could just try speeding this up. We can try slowing down the shrink of the wind square. We can put these closer together. Among all those ideas, let's just try speeding up. Vroom. Okay, it's too hard to control. We tested it. It's too hard to control. Let's turn it back down, and that will reduce the speed of this shrinking wind square. Okay. You can see how by defining the rules the way they are, we're able to target specific rules and tweak these specific rules in pretty straightforward and simple ways. Even though this is a lot of rules, each one is very straightforward. It's very well defined. This format is strict and regimented for a good reason. It helps us organize. Now, I mentioned there was some other ways that we could think about the improvements of the game. This helps us look at the design concept, the game concept that we had before, this very simple concept, in a new way, which is let's really look at the rules, because we have an opportunity to tweak each one. We also found that we had problems we needed to solve because some of this just wasn't defined yet, right? But if we roleplay this, we may find that this actually would be the game that we thought of, and that's good. Could it be better? Well, that's what we can talk about right now. Because I mentioned briefly once before, and I wanted to come back to it, that there are ways of thinking about any design and how you could see opportunity. Okay? We talked about problems, like, oh, it's too slow, or there's no way to win, or something. Talk about problems, and then you can solve them. We talk about that, and you can do that with this design process, yes. But I also mentioned you can find opportunities and improve the game. Opportunities that you see like, oh, wait, there's a new need we didn't even know we had. Let's address that. Or, here's this need, and we've got one idea to do it, but is there a better one? And you look for new ideas. Those opportunities can also improve. Okay, I mentioned that this design process is true for all forms of design. And that's true. There's something called product design. There's something called service design. There's interior design. Right? One could even think of what a chef does as designing a dish, you know. There's graphic design. There's, character design. There's narrative design. There's so many kinds of design. All of them can benefit from these tenets of design that I'm going to describe right now. What I'm trying to tell you is, just like this is a generalized process that'll help you get out of a jam and always improve, and it's just super useful, it's a cheat sheet, here's another cheat sheet. So we say, okay, we got this crazy game, and, it's actually pretty simple, but it's got these rules. That exploded the complexity, didn't it? It's okay. It defines it really well. You're not going to be confused by it. So what can we do to make it better? I mean, we thought of a couple things like a wall, but what else could we do, right? When we think about what's level 2 like, what's level 3 like, what's level 4 like, is it the same level? That would seem kind of dull. And what does it mean when the player experience is like dull? Isn't that bad? Yes, actually. It's always safe to go back to the player experience. And imagine the player who's like trying to be the learning machine, but there's nothing new to learn. Yeah. The player will disengage. We haven't talked about the mechanics of experience yet. That's an advanced topic. But it's true. This is where daydreaming comes from. If you're bored, your brain will want to find the thing. And as soon as your brain disengages, you're out of the game loop. There is no game. Yep. So what do we do? I'm going to describe the 4 tenets of design. design has, whoops, hello. I just zoomed in on accident. All design can benefit from these design tenets. It's funny, too. Once you start thinking in this way, you begin to realize it's everywhere. It's in music, it's in graphic design, it's in story, it's in jokes, it's in everything. These aren't in any particular order. They are just things to consider when you're kind of like looking for new opportunities. There's things to consider when you're thinking, maybe there's something missing from my design. Is there variation in my design? Variation. What does that look like? Well, I mean, we could do some graphic design. I'll show you. Here's a square. Okay, here's a long square. Okay, here's a circle. Here's a triangle. Variation, right? This would be a black square. Check that out. Here's a square inside of a square. Variation. Right? When you show variation, it could be visual, it could be sound, it could be gameplay, it could be the path you need to take to get to the win square. It could be the fact that the win square is going really slow this time. Variation. It's just difference, right? There's a good reason psychologically why this attracts our attention. If it's the same, our brains are so good at making things efficient that we just sort of gloss over it and suddenly it begins to disappear and not exist. We'll come back to this idea. In fact, we'll come back to all these. This is so important. These design tenets help us make design better, help us find opportunities, help us see problems that we didn't realize were in our design. Is there contrast in my design? Contrast. Contrast. What do you mean? Well, like, is it a white square in a black space? Or is it a black square in a white space? Contrast. Is this a win square that is always shrinking, except this one time where I have a switch that can stop it from shrinking? Is this a level in which all of my controls are reversed? Like left is right, right is left, up is down, down is up. Is this a situation where I'm trying to push another thing into the win square? Or I need to move things out of the way in order to get to the win square because it's actually obstructed with stuff that I can push around. Now, some of these begin to defy the contract of the game, like the players agreed to some rules, and here we are heavily contrasting some basic rules, so maybe some of that is dangerous. Like we don't want to lose the player. But one of the things that benefits from one of the things that design benefits from is paying attention to one of these tenets. Having some contrast provides a brand new way of looking at things. Does my design have rhythm? Now, rhythm, you might think, is all about audio. It's all about music. Not really. Let me visually show you rhythm. Here's a square. Okay, here's another square. Okay, here's another square. Or a column of a building or stairs. Rhythm. Visually, rhythm. In fact, when you play a level and the end of the level has a little like bit of music and a little display of score, and then wipes out and then it wipes back up and shows you the title of the next level, and then you continue. And every level does that. That's a sequence that you see over and over again. That's a rhythm. So rhythm could include time. It could also include just some predictable pattern. Imagine now you start to combine these things, variation with rhythm or contrast with rhythm, like square, 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 black square, square, right? This is variation. It's also contrast. It's also rhythm. Wow. These are just little goofy little doodles on a page, but it's going to hold your attention a little bit more than a blank page. We'll talk more about that later, but let's move on to the last one, because I'm going to show you 4 tenets of design. All design, even music, does this. Variation, contrast, rhythm, and progression. Game design does this too, and of course it does, because as you go to level 2, level 3, it gets harder. What do I mean by that? Well, it's easier to lose, it's harder to win. For a number of different reasons, there is a progression. In fact, you may be given extra powers, and that has a progression because you now have more items, more skills, more something. At the same time, you might be given more challenges, hazards, monsters, and things. In general, it might be getting harder, but there's actually multiple progressions that might be happening in your typical game. What does progression look like? And for example, I'm just keep doing graphic design because it's just so easy while I'm drawing. Well, here's a square. Here's another square. Here's another square. Progression. Right? This has a predictable change. It's getting bigger. This rhythm was just a predictable repetition, a predictable pattern of iteration, for example. So what happens when we start combining all of these things, right? We get something that begins to attract attention. And what happens when our game is sort of boring? I mean, our game is really simple. Hey, player, you're a square. Make it to the win square. Immediately, players are kind of rolling their eyes like, really? That's all there is? Well, we better start making it exciting pretty soon. But you can immediately see how this could be dangerous, because this might actually not be very exciting of a game for very long. You might do it once or twice and be like, okay, I kind of get it. Well, what can we do to make it more exciting, to make it more engaging, to make our player stay in the loop and be thinking about it, be puzzling over pieces of it, be sorting some things out? I mean, we instinctively put a wall here. We instinctively put like a black hole or some other things there. Well, we began to introduce variation, contrast, rhythm, and progression. We began to introduce these instinctively, but I'm going to tell you right now, these are factors that help any design get better. You can find opportunities, you could work out problems. If we said level 1 is, there's the win square over there, player, you're over here, and you can move. Ready? Go. Boom. They win. Level 2. Okay, player, you're here, and the win square is there. Go. Boom, boom. Yeah, you win. Okay, level 3. The win square is here, you're there. Ready? Go. And the player's like, wait a minute, this is the same thing. Role play as the player with me for a second. Okay, win? Yes. Okay, level 4. You're here, the win square is here. Ready? Go. Hold on. I'm now going to predict level 5, 6, 7, 8. They're all going to be the same. This is going to be the same. I've done it 3 times already. I can do it a 4th, but like, I'm kind of over it. There's another reason why we've been saying the players are learning machines. There's nothing for this machine to run on right now. There's no problem. There's nothing to figure out, nothing to learn. What could we do? We could add variation, contrast, rhythm, and progression. Any of these. We could add one thing. Well, first of all, there is a rhythm going on. Next level, next level, next level. That's comforting, but it's going to get boring pretty soon. It could get crazy, and without that rhythm, they might not feel comfortable. There's kind of a reason why, especially like Nintendo and stuff, have a progression of level that gets harder and harder, and each one is, crazy. And yet, after each level, it goes through a pattern of something very calming, very similar. So no matter what is going on, the in-between level stuff feels the same. They begin to anticipate it, so this could be crazy and crazy and crazy. But the in-between times are very calming. And it's contrast. Think about this. This is gameplay. This is rest. This is gameplay. This is rest. This is gameplay. This is rest. If you're familiar with music, you're going to start recognizing this as well. There's rhythm. There's progression. There's contrast. There's variation. When we say, well, how do we make level 2 more interesting? How do we make level 7 more interesting? How do we figure out this problem where no one can figure out how to win level 8? Isn't it obvious? Well, we go back to the player experience and we might realize there's a problem. We might say, hold on, is there an opportunity that we could introduce instead? And we could look at these design tenets to have some insight. Maybe there's an opportunity in contrast. We haven't tried that yet. Let's try that. These are general ideas: variation, contrast, rhythm, progression. Similar to how these are general ideas, that we find needs that the subject of design has, and then we try to address those needs and test those needs to evaluate how well they do, so that we can find new insight and improve more. This is also generalized, because I told you this is the design process no matter what you are designing. In our case, games, but it could be anything. Same here. No matter what you're designing. In fact, we've been drawing the whole time, so you can imagine this is graphic design. Some of this might look interesting. You might be mentally putting this inside that open space. You might be drawn to this set of shapes over here because of the variation. You might feel comfortable about this progression or this rhythm. There is qualities of experience, even in graphic design, that benefit from these design tenets, and so does game design. So when we go back to our rules, we can be clear about what these rules actually do for our player's experience. And as we test, we may run into problems. We can try and address them, like the speed of the player. But then we're like, well, now what? I mean, don't we have a game? I guess we're done. Yes, but could it be better? Like, should we stop? The answer is no. I mean, design just wants to keep doing this and keep improving the design. So if everything is sorted and there's no problems, aren't we done? No. Actually, we can find new opportunities to make it better. We started to do it last time, and this is what we were doing instinctively. We were adding variation, contrast, rhythm, and progression because we were adding new levels, and each level had some extra challenge in it. We did not, for example, add any variation, contrast, rhythm, or progression to what the player can do. It stayed the same the whole time. You can move up, down, left, right. But what if we did change it? Hey, player, you've got a, speed boost or teleporting thing or something. Right? Or a door. That would also impede movement. So the point is, we thought about what we could do with our understanding of design so far. And with that, last time we said, well, let's just do something, let's make it, and let's feel free, and we did. And we made something, and literally it was a game. But what we're finding out now is here's our path to improvement. First of all, let's make sure that we've defined everything. That helps us test and evaluate to see if there are problems we should solve, and we found some. And then we want to look for any improvements if we can find them, and here are some ways to look for improvements. If I told you, insert a new level for our game that has a lot of contrast, you could probably brainstorm that by saying, well, let's see, I will think of all the ideas on how to insert contrast and prioritize it to the best one. I'll test it out and evaluate. You see where I'm going with this. If I said, yeah, I want you to put in progression, right? You could say, well, I'm going to make the player move the same rate, but I'm going to have the wind square shrink faster. Progression. We have a way now to think about how these basic ideas about what the player does with our game rules gives rise to the player experience that we're going for, because not only can we define these rules better, but we can see things that help all design, including our game design, so we can find new opportunities. This, in short, helps us to do this part of the process, find new ideas to meet the needs. In fact, it helps us see the needs. To understand that a player would get really bored by level 4 if the level didn't change, there's a need. They need something. It's probably having to do with rhythm, progression, contrast, variation. Yes? Okay. So, what's up, bots? I try not to go over. An hour is what we try to do. Just little bite-sized pieces of chatting about game design. Right? If you're looking at these bite-sized pieces and you follow the series, what you're building up is best practices. I mean, one of the best things we did was say, here's some myths. This is what design is not. Here's what the designer's role is not. But equally as important is what we do and how we approach things and what we can see. And today was about what opportunities we can take advantage of. You might actually look at the games you play differently. In fact, congratulations, I just ruined games for you, because you're going to look at the games differently. You're going to look at small towers differently. You're going to see that I went through this process to come up with this game. Right? I continue to use this process to find opportunities to refine the decisions, to refine the rules of the game, to insert variation, rhythm, contrast, progression. You bet. So today we took another small step. We will continue to build on that. And as we go forward, I'm going to have to stop summarizing where we are now, because there's going to be more to do, and it takes too long. You know? But that's okay. These videos are hanging out on YouTube. You can always go back and look at them. For now, though, we're in a jungle. We like to make games. We like to talk about design, like today. Like to make mechanics, game mechanics. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, well, it's rules. Game rules. Game rules like, if this condition is true, then do that result. That's a game mechanic. But we make them in the game engine, and so defining the rules first and then making them is how we do it. If you're interested in game art, game design chat like this, the game design workshop where we actually make the game mechanics, or you just want to watch a cartoon ape play games like Fortnite or Mind Over Magnet, then follow and be notified. And when you show up on stream, do me one big favor. Do Command Tie. Command Tie lets me know you're here. I sometimes get distracted. I sometimes get involved in what I'm talking about, and I may not know you're here, but I want to know. So please do Command Tie, and then I can say, you're here, yay! In the meantime, have fun, do well, be good, stay safe, happy holidays. See ya.